Well, we lived at 902 Josephine since April 1st, 1960. Long time. You weren't 2 years old. None of these houses the same people live in. I mean, or their families. This used to be Bettersworth Motor Company right there. That Christian church parking lot. This was Park City Hotel. It was right on this corner, like that. And if I remember correctly, I think they had a swimming pool in that at one time. I wanted to think it was an Olympic swimming pool. And then right here on State Street, that used to be a drive under. There was a service station right there. Gulf, if I remember correctly.
Then there was a car dealership on that side.
Yeah. And this was a drugstore on this corner of 10th and State. CDS number 6 or 2, and that one right on that corner was the other one.
This corner right here, where Woolworths used to be?
No, where the wealth management place is.
Straight ahead.
And this was American Bank, Norman's. Jack Russell's right about 912, where I bought my dress that I got married in. And that was the Helm Hotel. Mariah House. I'm glad they've kept the front of it like it was. I've never known anybody that was buried in this old cemetery. Well, we're about to turn on Clay Street off of Memorial, which was not here.
6th Street.
It was 6, yeah. And this was it Lowe's? What was this? Feed and Seed. No, it was Lowe's, okay. And we're now
Sweet Feed Mill, was that what they called it?
Going over the tracks to where the famous Pauline Tabor's was. Old Romer Brothers Lumber. And of course Graham Motley's been over there on, it's now Hill Motley, but wasn't it Graham Motley?
I don't know that name.
I think it was Graham Motley. It's been there too for years. And of course Clay Street is where Bowling Green first developed, Clay and Adam and Kentucky, because they were close to the railroad track. That's an old fence. I don't know how they did that rock work and then had that little bead over it. You know how? I've never known that. And I think I remember telling you that we used to call this the Holy Roller Church here on the corner of Stubbins and then as we turn on Glen Lily, this corner used to be Clark's Grocery.
Right straight ahead.
Right here. They've added on to it. This was the original right in here, and they've added on, connected it some way. I'm afraid this doesn't look anyways near what it used to. That house looks nice. Kept up. And right in here, I think it was this corner house that was Uncle Buford's mother's oldest brother right there. And then this was all belonged to Mr. J.L. Durbin, this land. It was part of his farm.
So like Durbin's department store?
Durbin's department store. And this was Campbell. He built that, Mr. Campbell. And This was the Durbin house.
Nobody's watching you pointing. You got to say what
On
they
the
are.
right, the tall two-story brick, and across from it was Carney Johnson's. And at that time, he had a meat company. And Miss Cassidy, here, these houses on the right. Now here's Mama Fleener's. If you want. You know, there's some nice steps. I went to look. We have a picture of Daddy Bob sitting in this driveway with his truck.
Little garage back there you told me the other day.
Well, it was actually all connected, but it was just, I guess it was one that they had made themselves, you know. They didn't, because it.
And who? Let's start again. Whose house was this?
This was Mama Fleener and
Fleener.
Granddaddy Fleener,
Okay.
Mother's parents.
Okay.
And Mother was born in this house. And it had an upstairs, and that's where I guess all the kids lived when they were growing up. But then, after Mother and Daddy divorced, we moved in that as an apartment. And then Mama Fleener and Granddaddy built this house on the left right next to theirs. And later they sold it.
The blue house was the one
blue,
they built?
Yeah, but it always seemed like it was further back. And, oh, that's so sad to see that over there, those big trees. Mama Fleener also had flowers. She had a canna bed. I never liked the cannas. And she also had sweet peas. That is so funny because it always seemed like it was a deeper yard than what it is. So beyond that little red shed then, and it looks like they've got that cloth across there, that would have been the back part of the place. But Granddaddy had his plumbing shop, and then he had a space to park his old truck, and there was no wall or anything. He could load his truck with the plumbing supplies that he used. And then there was
so he
a
had
wall.
kind of like a carport he could pull under.
Well, it
Put
was
your
had
sand?
doors. It
Oh.
had doors.
Oh, okay.
All of it had doors. I guess you would call it sort of a shed. I don't know. But he had shelves, and he had his plumbing stuff in there. And then there was a wall, and then there was a place for 2 more cars, and they had doors, but best I remember they were metal or something. They weren't fancy. It was like I just thought they called it the garage, but in today's world it wouldn't be a fancy garage, you know. And then behind, you could go in Granddaddy's plumbing area, and you could walk straight through, and there was a back door, and that back door came out into the chicken yard. And that chicken yard had to be about where that red building is on the other side. And then further out in there was some big rocks, but it doesn't look rocky from back here, does it?
Well, there were some big rocks that
Yeah.
you could see.
I mean, they would be that high
Oh,
to
I see.
jump off of, because we always liked to do that. And of course, this White House that we see right in there, it wasn't there. And I have no clue how much acreage they had, But I think theirs went, because they built that house that's now blue, And that house has been added on to, I see, in the back because it didn't have that back wing on it.
Mm-hmm.
But, and Granddaddy had his garden behind that.
Behind the blue house?
Uh-huh. It was all their land, and
Yeah.
then they sold so, being a child, I don't know how much of it they sold. You see, this was the Carney Johnson's. I used to walk down here and I'd help Doris. She was a couple of years older than me, but she was always taller than somebody
Doris who?
younger, Doris Johnson. And I'd help her do the dishes. I didn't mind helping wash or dry the dishes. Or somebody else didn't like to do it at home, but didn't mind doing it for her. But Miss Cassidy, your all's house was built by her. This is where she started, these little houses right here on the right.
Huh.
That house has been redone right there. Then there was a big house, and I can't think of their name, on this property that we're turning into that now belongs to Hope House. And she sang opera, and we used to open our windows at night, and we could hear her sing. She'd be practicing. She'd go, ooh, It was, of course, Lois and I just would laugh. So I guess, see, this can connect. Maybe right in there is where I guess right in there, that woodsy part is where the big rocks were.
Oh, okay.
Let's see, this one's Crudson. That was the street that Granddaddy's sister lived on. Evidently, Granddaddy's mother died at an earlier age because there was Joe and his father had another wife. Her name was, we always called her Miss Alice. This Sunrise Drive.
Uh-huh.
Jimmy Stewart built houses in some of these little houses in here. And your dad worked for him when he was in college, and, doing the whatever he needed. And I think I told you earlier, I don't know if you got that recorded or not, that after we married, I got $93 was my wife allotment check from the government. And I was making $120 with my job, and I got about 110 to live on. They didn't take as many taxes out. And so I would add $7 to that $93 and make it an even $100. So I saved $100 a month. And I had hoped for us to buy a little house over there. But your daddy wanted to buy a car. So we bought a Pontiac. Paid cash for it. Yeah, and here we are back to the Ennis farm on the right, on Glen Lily, and the old rock or stone, whatever you want to call it, fence. It's still here, and it's a little, water used to run in front of it from the creek, and one time Lois and Sarah Margaret and I, it was a Sunday, and we had told them that we were going to go for a bike ride. Now, we just had one bicycle. And so we went for a ride. One of us would ride a while, and then the others would walk, and they'd stop and catch up. And so looked up, and here comes Mama Flynn and Granddaddy's car. And so we're in trouble. I got in trouble because I was the oldest. And so Sarah Margaret and Lois got to ride back to the house, and I had to ride the bicycle.
And whose farm was this on the
The
right?
Ennis. There were several brothers. Harry Ennis was one.
Kind of see.
George Ennis, I went to school with, and he was my age, and he was one of their sons. Frank Ennis was another. And I think there was another Ennis, you know. But it was, isn't it interesting, though, that beautiful fence, you know? And to think that each piece of rock was picked up and brought over here.
And that was slave built?
I would say it was, Brent. Now this one looks a little different, but all of this was the Ennis's. Yeah, that's pretty. It's still pretty good. Isn't it a pretty old creek, though? My. Can you see it on that side
Yeah.
at all? And now there's a new road up here this was the Martin. The Martins lived there, but that was one of the Ennis's daughters, and she married a Martin, and they had a son, Jerry Martin, and he was president of Bowling Green Bank and Trust. For a short time, I lived with Mama Fleener and Granddaddy. After I got married, I lived with Sue and Jesse in Auburn from January to July of 1953. Well, I moved in with Mama Fleener and Granddaddy in their front room, which used to be the living room, but they had made a bedroom out of it. So I lived there until I got my apartment at 1405 Kentucky Street. 1405 and a half was the exact address, because I was upstairs. I'm not real sure how many months before Wallace, got home from service, but Mama Fleener then died in February of 1954, because I was living upstairs in that apartment, and Uncle Arthur came home. They came home to check, about her because she was ill, and she died, and he didn't have appropriate clothes, so he wore a suit of your dad's to the funeral. Your dad came home from service in August of 1954. We're on Veterans Boulevard now, and to the left was Morgantown Road, and we're about to come up onto the 6880, which is Russellville Road. And in between those two roads, Daddy Bob and farm, well, actually it was his uncle's farm, but he managed it. And
Who was his uncle?
Uncle Bob. He lived in Nashville.
His name was Bob Oates also.
No, he must have been a half brother of his we
Bob's
called him
mother.
Pops. His name was George Oates, Bob's father. And Ewan, his name was R.T. Ewan. He was awfully good to Bob, but Bob and John Downing and Henry English, they farmed together. Their farms met somewhere from the Russellville Road to the Morgantown Road. And now we're on the Russellville Road. We're about to approach the farm on the left, which the house and the barn and everything's been torn down. On the right-hand side, on this mound, Charlie Dixon. I couldn't think of it the other day, Brent. But you can see the clumps now of grass, trees, and overgrowth. And this driveway, this lower driveway right there, was where it went in toward the barn area. And then And this area right in here was John Downing's. So where they met in the back, I have no clue. I had walked back in some of those fields to take Daddy Bob water when he would be mowing back there. I can remember doing that. Well, Joe Bogle bought a lot of John Downing's. No, that doesn't sound right. Yeah, it was John and Ethel. And Joe Bogle, came on the scene in later years. Those fallout shelters.
Oh.
Yeah, he put in a bunch of fallout shelters out here somewhere. And then I think later he rented some of this area. He built it, some apartments and such for students. But Charlie Dixon, I said he lived across on that little mound. And Charlie liked to drink, and he'd go off to get him some more booze, and he would go on with his horses and wagon. He'd go and many times they'd bring him home. He'd be passed out, but the horses knew where to go.
How to get him home.
Yeah. He had a very tolerant wife. This all grew up, it was nothing but the railroad track. I think I told you too that I would, on Friday, I would go to Grandmother Self's for the weekend, and I would walk and start walking
From here?
from Russellville Road to 1310 Center Street, which was a little distance, but if that's the only way you had to get around, that's the way you went. Mr. B.E. Harris used to stop occasionally and pick me up, and he would take me right to Grandmother's. On Monday then, Granddaddy would take us to school, or take me to school, because Lois was living with him at that time. But he would take me to school, and then, I got home.
Is that the same B.E. Harris that went to Eastwood?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
His son, Charles Harris, and then I went to high school with Charles's wife, Elizabeth. She was Elizabeth Ann Morris, which is, everybody called her Tootie. And we're going under the underpass near Western now, and to the right was Edge Hill Shopping Center, and that's where I did my laundry when we lived, especially with Miss Potter on the Nashville Road, and they also had a diaper service, and that is what I used when you were born. And there was a barbecue place and a little pizza place, that Ron's Pizza, that's where he started. Krispy Kreme donuts. Dixie Cream. And then it was...
Was there a little hardware store in there? Remember somebody saying that one time?
It might have been, but 1405 Kentucky. We're headed in that direction. And that property's all gone, and now it's nothing but a parking lot. All the places that I've lived are gone except where I'm living now.
Guess you better stay there.
I guess I had, hadn't I? I worked at the Western Trade School, which was the vocational school of Western, and I could just go right up between the Kentucky building and get to what we called 6880, and then walk on to the trade school, which was down by Dero Center now. And right here on the left, here's the parking lot that used to have houses. Right there in that curve is where the ones that had that little dairy thing. Now, right here, that's where 1405 Kentucky was. And right on the other side of this little duplex here on the left was a nice home. It was a brick home, and it was my 6th grade teacher, Miss Magnolia Stovall. Miss. She used to say she didn't miss a thing. We're going up in front of the Alumni Center now. Right part of this high place, hotel, that was T.B. Cook's grocery. And that's where Grandmother Self bought her groceries. And when Granddaddy died, they didn't have an and or on their checking account, and so she couldn't write a check. It was just Mr. and Mrs. or something. And so Mr. Cook let her charge her groceries. And right here on the right is where 1310 Center Street was, which is torn down, and now...
So right about here.
Yeah, right about here. And Charlie Oliver and Francis lived right across the street after they married. There was a duplex. And here on 13th Street, this service station used to be further down. When they've rebuilt it and moved it up. And we're going on behind this building, and this, especially where you see the tall fence, right in that area, that was the backyard. And it had an alley, which you can still see right here in front by that white garage. But that alley ran down and it stopped. And on the other side was, you can see the black roof up there. That was Mr. Townsend. And he would talk to Grandmother and Granddaddy Self would take me back there and we'd talk. And one time, right here you can see the brick house. And we would talk, and I'd ask questions and they'd say, be quiet, and they would still talk, and he'd say, leave that child alone. How's she gonna find out if she doesn't ask questions? So now you know my personality.
To this day, you still
yeah,
keep asking questions.
I do. These are the original houses all through here. And this red building, right, that's where Mr. Coates' shoe shop was. And then here on College Street, going up College.
So this is probably a grocery?
It was a grocery store. It was, I'll tell you in a minute. This hill, you used to be able to slide down in the winter. They rope it off, and you could bring your sleds and come down. And also they used it for soapbox derbies in the beginning when they started that. Mr. Keister was the grocery. And there used to be on Kenton and Broadway, there was a grocery. That he had a grocery, or some member of his family.
That's where the ghost sign is.
And the sign was painted there. Break or something for you all.
Uh-huh.
And we went out to the orchard, and Shirley said, well, what have you all been doing this week? And they said, we've been going down the alleys. Interesting brick on it. And this sign, when Wallace graduated, that was the Spirit Makes the Master, 1956. Well, it was the year he graduated, 57, spring, but he was in school when they did that. All of this is different. This road used to go straight, went on down to the, let's see, to Center Street, which it went connected back up here. All of this is different right here. I don't remember how exactly it connected in here, but this was not.
Well, that was a straight shot to Center Street right through there.
And this is this, like I don't think I said that this time, but at 1310 Center, this was the street that when the soldiers during World War II, they used to go to Fort Campbell, and or Camp Campbell, maybe they called it then, and they would go down this way, and they saw grandmother had 5 stars hanging in her windows, little flags, and that represented all 5 of the men, besides granddaddy's self, in her life that were in service, and they would throw those little miniature Hershey bars to us. And they did it several times. It wasn't just one time. And the old heating plant was right there. That used to have some big rocks too. And the street used to go straight across. I guess it's right in here. Yeah. And it went over to State Street, and that's where the Rural Training School was. On the left is about where the Western Trade School was. And it was several buildings, but they weren't nice buildings. They were just, they were pre-war buildings. And veterans from the Korean War then, came. And, well, I guess it would be Korean in 1952, wouldn't it? That's when I started working there, October of 1952. And I guess you were over a year old before I quit. I was in the hospital. You were born September 30th, and all the records for the veterans had to be in so that they would get paid. They got paid to go to school. And I did that. I was secretary, and so I did the records. And I was in the hospital, and I stayed 5 days. So I can't remember if it was the 5th of the month I had to get the records in. And so anyway, I told them to bring me my records, and I did the records, completed them while I was in the hospital so that the veterans could get paid. Of course, they didn't know that. On the left is now what's called Warren Central, and when it was built, it was Warren County High School. It has a new front now. They built a new front on it, an addition. But that's where I went my junior and senior year of high school. Was cheerleader.
Junior and senior, then your first 2 years were at South Warren?
Yes. We were in that district. Well, see, the South Warren, it was at Rockville, and the school they built a new school. Bid Manning's father owned this on the right here on Morgantown Road. He had a farm, and I can't tell you, but it was right in this area. As I'm looking, I guess that's the old road right over there, isn't it?
Yeah, I guess it is.
Uh-huh, it is. I don't see how they farmed that, because if that's all along that ledge, you know that was, it's probably other places in those farms.
Uh-huh.
But as far as I know, alfalfa probably was all I know that they grew, But right in here is where Henry English's house was. It could have been right here because it was a little high area. Is where the house set back there. We're on the Morgantown Road, and here's Western Hills Motel, and they used to have a restaurant back in there. But your dad helped John Swack with some tobacco or something, so John was going to repay him by taking us to lunch one Sunday after church. And we came out here, and it was a buffet. It was all you could eat. I remember John saying, "Now, Wallace, let's rest a little while, and then we can eat some more." That John. One of these houses was the mayor's. It's right now, there it is, on the right. It's now owned by the Stickles. Then Mrs. Who was president, and she lived there and started that little garden. She's the one that started planting all the evergreens around on campus. Who were some of the former presidents? Stickles, they bought that house for Mr. Stickles, his dad. And then over here on the right in the back is the Colonial Court. And
We'll pull back there.
yeah, it was a nice entrance. It had a house in the front, and they've torn it down to build, some of the current. On the left, right here is where the Rural Training School is on State Street, and the swimming pool where I learned to swim was right up here on the left. It's now Music Hall.
Well, it was up that way, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was, but it's right here. It was behind the gym. The old.
I thought it was up in that.
No,
where that
no,
square is.
back here. No, that was the Industrial Arts
Yeah,
Building.
that's true.
And I think Ron Tabor said that he used to live when he was younger in one of those houses. And I have no idea who owns these, if it's individuals.
Mm-hmm.
But you can see where the little drive, isn't that neat? But there was a big house in front of it. It was more like this house on the left. Best I remember, though, it was white instead of the brick. I think it was.
You mean like right out on the street?
Yeah, where the new building is. The Rural Training School was designed for Western teachers, elementary teachers that were going to be teaching in one-room schoolhouses because they still had those in the rural areas. And then that used to be the president's home at one time too. We've had several president's homes, haven't we? That was Diddle Dorm right to the left. And then the training school. This end was the kindergarten. Rita went to kindergarten there. We're on top of State Street, looking toward the town. This has always been a pretty street. The houses, I'm thankful they've kept some of these good houses.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And this house right here, that stone with the brick, I think that was Dr. Graves of Graves Gilbert Clinic. And then somebody came along and built this thing, and it was always an eyesore. It's just. And this blue house is where Brent Law lived with that little bay window there. That was his apartment. And I did the kitchen in this house on the left on this corner with the pretty doors. I did it when I first started at Castner Knot. They had a parade of
So that when it was a parade home,
Uh-huh.
you did that
Uh-huh.
black and white checked
Uh,
floors.
Yeah. Uh-huh. And then we're still on State Street. This is the Episcopal Church. It's always been very attractive, but on the right is now called Anna's, but it was a Presbyterian church, and that's where Mother went to church. And this telephone building, this was the telephone building. It hasn't always been there. There were homes. I think the Jacksons lived there, which was, and that was the Stones' house right there, that on the left there, with that pretty door. It was Dan Stone. Now we're back to the State Street Methodist Church, which has always been very pretty. And one time when Hillary Clinton was in Bowling Green, she went to that church. I don't know why she was in Bowling Green, I guess campaigning. Allen Motor Company, I'm glad that sign's still there. Sears used to be right here on the right where the vacant lot is. And the Presbyterian Church right there on the left, they celebrated a couple of years ago their 200th anniversary. First Baptist Church, they have been there over 200 years, and they were started by Providence Knob out at Rockville. Did you know that?
I did know that.
And we're back downtown to the Normans, the store all.
Women know
Women
and all
know.
men owe.
That's right. This used to be Riley's Bakery, right here with the Black Marble, Dublin's, which is Dublin's now. And the Princess Building on the right with the green awning, that used, and the Parakeet was right here, the 440 Main, but that's where, that used to be a theater, and on the right side was was the cafe. John the Greek. That's what they referred to him as, John the Greek. And he's the one that had that cafe. And he had ham, and it stood on a stand on the counter. And he would just, when you wanted a ham sandwich, he'd just go with a knife and cut it off, the slices.
Mm-hmm.
And I worked across the street from Mr. and Miss Tannenbaum at Feldman's when I was in my junior year of high school.
And where was Feldman's located?
On Park Row.
Oh, this way?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
And this was CDS number 1, and that's where I went out one day and didn't pay for my lunch. It was 50 cents. I'd had a grilled pimento cheese and a cherry Coke, but that was the day Wallace left to go overseas, and I didn't see him for 19 months. But they let me pay it the next day. They didn't care. And right here where it says the place, across the top, it used to go at an angle, Feldman's. That's where I worked. But anyway, Mr. T sent me over to John the Greek's to get them ham sandwiches. Now, they were Jews, and they weren't supposed to eat pork, but they did. And he would buy me a sandwich. He was always real good to me, and I made $5 in my pay envelope after working on Friday afternoon and Saturday. And he would show that he took 50 cents out for my taxes, but I'd always have a $5 bill in my envelope, so he paid my taxes for me. And he bought my lunch some. He was very nice. He knew that Mother had worked there, and he knew that she struggled, and that was his way to help out. And so you can't always say that they're tight as a Jew.
So what kind of store was Feldman's?
It was a ladies' ready-to-wear.
Okay.
One of the things was Jane Holly blouses. They were $5.99, and that was a little expensive, but they were very, very nice dresses. And Pauline Tabor would send her girls in a taxi up to Feldman's, and Mr. and Miss Tannenbaum would help them buy whatever it was that they were buying, and then they would call it a cab and send them back to Pauline's. And she ran just a running account, you know. And I could buy a nice dress for $8.99. $12.99? That was, you know, I had gone a little overboard. But I did, and I would pay $2 a week until I got my bill paid off. He would let me charge it. And there's the Spot Cash store we're now on Main Street. And here's the Federal building where I got my Social Security card on the left. It's now called William H. Natcher. And this was all housing or stores on this lower Main. And here on the corner of Kentucky and Main, Adam and Main, there was a drugstore. It was Holland's drugstore. And there was also a theater house, which has been torn down. I guess Municipal Utilities owns all of that. Railroad station is up here on the left, and at one time, I wish I could think of the name of it. It had a street that went down toward this Veterans, and Jimmy Stewart had a little restaurant over here on the left. That was called something. I think there was some complaints about that area. Jonesville. Sarah Jane Meeks worked for Duncan Hines. She was his secretary. She did things. She was a mess. And B.C. Meeks. And Sarah Jane worked for Mr. Hines, and she told one time something about that she stuck an ice pick in some fluid machine stuff that she was working with, and she told Mr. Hines that that country ham didn't smell good, and he said, well, get rid of it, and she took it home with her. She was a mess. Well, we're on College Street now, looking up at Western, and right in here was College Street Inn, and it's now, I guess the city owns all of this now. And a little further down here on the corner was Campbell's Open Air Market, where Daddy Bob worked. He was the butcher there, and across the street later this was Houchins. But Brown's Ice Cream was right in here, and when I was pregnant with you, Brent, I'd go to the doctor, and if I hadn't gained much weight, then we'd come there and I'd have a hot fudge sundae. I guess that's the reason you like chocolate so well. And this used to be Pearson's drugstore on the corner of Main and College, and that was a good place to go. This used to be Penny's on the right. We're back to CDS number 1 drugstore, and this was Durbin's department store, and that was the State Theater. And on the corner here was the funeral home, Gerard Bradley. And I remember when the Milligan building here on this corner, when it was built, we didn't have very many modern looking businesses, and it was certainly different. And on that corner was a church too, and I want to thank it. And we're back at Keister's Grocery, which is now, what is it now? Hilligan's. I guess grandmother used to come here. Here's the kitchen, this back area right in here of that house that I did. Former mayor lived here on the right. And then we're going straight into Chestnut Street where, now this from grandmother's house, this is 13th Street. I mean, we went to BTU and at night, well, BTU was probably 5 or 6 o'clock, and we walked. You know, I don't know that Granddaddy even came after us afterwards. But in front of us is Miss Farnsworth's house, and to me, this has the prettiest doors in Bowling Green. I just think they're beautiful, and they've been there when the house was built, and she died. She was over 100 years old. Isn't that pretty?
Sure is.
And this was where Dr. Graham, Louis Graham's father lived. Dr. V.
right.
Graham on the right. And coming up onto the First Baptist Church, which is the original was, well, it says right there. No, that's when it was rebuilt. And here on this corner on the left is where
The yellow house.
the yellow house, yes, 1203 Chestnut. It was where Mother and Daddy had an apartment when I was little, and in all of the grandchildren's scrapbook on their back page, there's a picture of me sitting on something in that front yard. This is 11th Street. This is where, further over, where I went to school at 11th Street School. And Miss Farnsworth that I just spoke of, she was my 4th grade teacher, and she was also yours, Brent. I must have just gone 1 year to the rural training school, and that would have been the 5th grade, because 6th grade, 7th grade, 8th grade, I went to College High. Now, a lot of this, there's still old houses here, but some of it's been torn down, but we're coming now upon the 11th Street School, which is still here, and it's still just like it was.
And the windows have changed.
Yeah, they replaced those because they were full, big windows. But some of these houses, this corner house, that little Trey, what was his name? The cutest little boy in Nancy's 1st grade, Alexander. Barbara Bettisworth lived there. I remember when she lived there. It's funny how that went through here, didn't it?
Mm-hmm.
And then they're still working on houses everywhere. I guess it got those posts. That one's new. Right in there, it was the Fashion House. And then there was maybe a youth house. They were businesses. I think that one was the Fashion House. On this corner was Broadway Methodist Church. It's gone on the left. Rebels Landing was right here where that sign Kentucky Fried Chicken was. And right there was the
Quick and Tasty
Bakery. This was Kroger's right here, and this is where we walked to from Miss Potter's house during the snow in March of 1960 before we moved to our house, April 1st, to get groceries for her, and we were out of food for you, and we walked from her house up here and back, Wallace and I did, and left you with Miss Potter that couldn't walk with you. But at that time you were walking yourself, but she couldn't run after you if you did something wrong. And then here's Hunt's One Stop. That used to be what is now Kirk's Auto Mart. That used to be a popular place. I had a date with Wallace. That would have been in 1952, the winter of 1952.
Is that your first date?
No, I'm not real sure. The first date I had, well, I couldn't.
With him?
He asked me on a date. He said, "May I take you home?" And we had a ball game in Scottsville, played Allen County High. Well, the cheerleaders had to go with the cheerleading sponsor, which happened to be Georgia Sublet. And of course you had to go back with them, you know. And Eddie Diddle Jr. was the coach, and he didn't want the girls to do anything really. But I had gone to get a drink of water at the water fountain, and Wallace came up to me and he said, started talking to me, and he said, "May I take you home after the game?" And I said, "No." I said, "I have to go with the cheerleading sponsor, but you can some other time." So now, this was the Craig's house, and it's right next door to Miss Potter's, and they have made some changes to Miss Potter's house, quite a few changes, added on a lot to the back, but that one single window there was the kitchen window, and right under it was the sink, and it was a big sink. It was a double sink, but didn't have the divider in it. So, and that's when you were born. That's where I gave you your bath. It was the easiest to give you a bath in the kitchen sink. And that front window, that was part of the kitchen, but the other windows were in the living room. Those dormers up over. And then we had a bathroom and 2 bedrooms, and you can see the roof that does like this behind the green tree, the short one. That was an attic, and you could walk in it. It had a door that you could just step into the attic, and it was a great attic. You know, you could put stuff in there, walk in. And then at that time, on the other side of the, like the left window at the top dormer, there was a porch that went, and it was a door, and you could go out over the lower part, and it was just a roof, but you could sit out there.
So where now are you saying that?
You see right here where the roof does look straight across? That part. That was Miss Potter's kitchen. That little window was in a little walkway, and then that longer window was in her kitchen. And see, there used to be just a side door here that the steps went up. That fireplace is not original. It's I think the door must have been about where the right window is there. And then when that big snow in March that I was speaking of, I came home. There was a garage that you could drive straight up into. It was an old garage. It was the rock with just a one door, one car garage, and it was narrow, little. And then, like where you see that tree, that magnolia tree, that was over here. That was a garden area. And she let us have a little garden back there. We'd have tomatoes and small stuff. But anyway, that big snow, I was at a sorority meeting at Dot Brown's house on Wakefield, and somebody happened to look outside, and they said, "It is snowing, it is snowing, it's coming down fast and hard." And everybody just sort of grabbed their things and we just left. I mean, the meeting was over, and somebody had ridden with me, and I had to take her home, and she lived in Ms. English's apartment building there on 12th and Chestnut, and but on the way I had to stop several times and get the snow off. It was the windshield wipers wouldn't take it off, and I had on we called them sling pumps. They were high heels, no heel, and the toes were out, and I was getting out in that snow while my feet were getting wet, and of course it was cold too, you know. And so anyway, by the time I got home and pulled in the driveway, I stopped right at the door so I could get out and go in, you know. Well, I had parked right in the middle of the driveway, and Wallace's car was up and he couldn't get it out, and it was better to be out in the snow than my car, you know, which we didn't take it out in it. But anyway, that was a night trying to get home. We had some good times here, Miss
So
Potter.
did the house end where the stone is, or
On the other side of it, Miss Potter had a bedroom that went back and a bathroom. Yeah,
towards
yeah.
us?
I think that about where it looks like right here, that I can't see because of that tree, but you know where the house goes back, I think that was the length of the house.
Okay. Interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it certainly changed. I'd like to see inside it. This was Dr. Grice's house here on the left, that big house. It sold at auction not too many years ago. And then this was the McCubbins' home right there. I think the stone with I think that's the one right there. And was McCubbin Farm, was where your house is built. Herb Smith lived right next door to Miss Potter. This one right here.
The stone looking one back there.
And then the Grices, Richard Grice. And of course this bypass was not even here. It stopped and Avenue was the street.
They connected all the way though?
Yeah, Laurel Avenue. And this was Houchin's Grocery on where Teresa's thrift store is on the left. And Lloyd's Dairy Dip, which is not there right now, it's gone. It's right here where that vacant spot is. Boy, I tell you, and they had Mr. and Miss Lloyd. They had white beans and cornbread brand. Walgreens, which was CDS number 7, on this side, which would be Broadway side, that's where I think your dad said maybe it was when he was a freshman at Western. And that would have been, he started in 48, but then he didn't do real good, you know, with his grades, and he had to work and so forth, but and then he had to go into service and so forth, but that was before I knew him. But he hopped curb there, and then there was a side entrance that you could go in. Best I remember, it would have been about where you see that last downspout, about where the W starts, that downspout, there was a door. And they had a counter, and you know, had a fountain, really. And Agnes and Dorothy worked there for years. And we used to go every Friday morning. I'd meet Wallace. I worked at Sherwin-Williams, and he had to go to the stockyard later, that he didn't have to go as early. So he would I'd meet him up there. I'd take my break real early and meet him, and we'd have breakfast, late breakfast. When Daddy Bob had his bypass surgery, and he came and stayed with us because he first went home, but then one of the boys got sick, and Mother called and said, "You're going to have to come get Daddy Bob because he can't stay here with this sick child." And so we did, and so I'd bring him up here, and he couldn't have any fat and everything, and Dorothy and Agnes would cook him a hamburger, and they would squeeze every bit of grease they could out of it, and I'd take my homemade pepper jelly. He wasn't supposed to have salt, and he'd put that on it to flavor it. Mr. and Ms. Young lived here on the left, on the right. Mr. Young was cantankerous, wasn't he? But your dad made you do stuff for him. You didn't want to, but he made you.